do not drink the wine. It's not safe. Something is inside. What do you mean? What do you mean by something is inside? Is anybody trying to hurt me and my baby? Please tell me.
The crystal wine glass was halfway to Simone's lips when the scream tore through the ballroom. Everyone at the lavish dinner party froze, 200 pairs of eyes turning toward the commotion at the entrance where security guards wrestled with a thin, desperate girl in ragged clothes. Her wild eyes locked onto the pregnant woman at the head table, and she shrieked words that would change everything. Please, ma'am, do not drink the wine. Do not drink that wine. The girl couldn't have been more than 16. Her ashy knees visible through torn jeans, her hair matted and unwashed. But the terror in her voice cut through the classical music and champagne, soaked laughter like a blade through silk. Before you judge what happens next, ask yourself this. Would you listen to a stranger who looked like they had nothing, or trust the people who pretend to have everything? Hit that subscribe button because this story will show you why the smallest voice sometimes carries the biggest truth, and why one billionaire's tears would wash away everything he thought he knew about loyalty, love, and the price of ignoring those the world has forgotten. The girl thrashed against the security guard's grip, her worn sneakers squeaking against the marble floor of the Metropolitan Ballroom. But her eyes never left Simone's face, pleading with an intensity that seemed to burn through the 60 feet of polished floor between them. The wine glass trembled in Simone's perfectly manicured hand, the deep red liquid inside catching the light from the dozen crystal chandeliers overhead. The room smelled of money, of expensive perfume and fresh flowers, of power and prestige, but underneath it all, something felt wrong, something the poor girl could sense, even if no one else could. Derek Wellington stood from his seat so fast his chair toppled backward, the crash echoing through the suddenly silent ballroom like a gunshot announcing the beginning of a war no one knew was coming. His 6'3" frame towered over the table as his face contorted with rage, the same expression that had made corporate rivals tremble and business partners scramble to please him for the past 15 years. This was supposed to be perfect, the celebration of his first child, his legacy, the heir to the Wellington fortune that had taken 3 generations to build from Atlanta's red clay to penthouses in Manhattan. He'd spent $400,000 on this dinner alone, flying in Maine Lobster and Argentine Bee, hiring the New York Philharmonic String Quartet, filling the room with white roses that cost more per stem than most people earned in an hour. And now this homeless girl was ruining everything with her crazy screaming about why. Get her out of here. Derek barked at his head of security, Malcolm, a former Secret Service agent who cost Derek $20,000 a month and was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of embarrassment. I don't care what you have to do. Get that girl out of my sight before I have every one of you fired and blacklisted from ever working security again in this city. His voice carried the weight of real threat, the kind of power that came from having $18 billion in assets and the willingness to destroy anyone who crossed him. Around the ballroom, his guests shifted uncomfortably in their designer clothes, diamonds glittering at throats and wrists, watching the scene unfold like it was dinner theater they hadn't ordered. Simone's hand was still frozen in the air, the wine glass suspended between the table and her mouth, her other hand resting protectively on the swell of her belly where their daughter grew, 7 months along and perfectly healthy according to every expensive test money could buy. The security guards lifted the girl off her feet, her thin body no match for their combined strength, but she kept screaming, kept fighting, her voice cracking with desperation that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than fear, somewhere that touched on absolute certainty of disaster. The wine is poisoned. Someone poisoned the wine. Please, please listen to me. I saw them do it. I saw everything. Her words tumbled out in a rush, each syllable more frantic than the last. And for just a moment, Simone's eyes met the girl's across the expanse of the ballroom. Something passed between them, something that made Simone's blood run cold, despite the warmth of the room, despite Derek's hand now on her shoulder, telling her everything was fine, despite 200 witnesses who would later swear the girl was clearly disturbed and dangerous. The girl's name was Jasmine, though no one in that room knew it yet, and she'd been sleeping in the subway tunnels beneath the city for 8 months since her grandmother died and left her with nothing but memories and a conscience that wouldn't let her walk away from what she'd seen. She'd been rummaging through the hotel's garbage bins 3 hours earlier, looking for food, when she'd witnessed something through the kitchen's back window that made her stomach turn, made her follow the staff member through the service corridors, made her risk everything to burst into this palace of wealth and privilege to warn a woman she'd never met. Now they were dragging her away, her fingers clawing at the air, reaching toward Simone, and in her eyes was the kind of truth that money couldn't buy and power couldn't silence, the truth that comes from having nothing left to lose and everything to give. Wait, Simone's voice was quiet, barely above a whisper, but in the silence of the ballroom it carried like thunder. She set the wine glass down on the white tablecloth, the base clicking against fine china, and stood slowly, one hand supporting her back, the other still cradling her pregnant belly. Her emerald evening gown, custom-made and worth more than most cars, shimmered as she moved, but her face had gone pale, her usual confidence shaken by something she couldn't name. "Derek, wait," she said again, louder this time, her eyes still locked on Jasmine's desperate face. What if she's telling the truth? The question hung in the air like smoke, and Derek's expression shifted from rage to disbelief to something harder, something that reminded Simone why his business partners feared him. "Baby, look at her," he said, his voice dropping to that patronizing tone he used when he thought she was being emotional or irrational. The tone that made her feel small despite her Princeton degree and her own family's money. "She's clearly on drugs or having a mental break. Malcolm," I said, "get her out." But Simone didn't sit down, didn't back away from the challenge in her husband's voice. And across the room, Jasmine went still in the guard's grip, hope flickering in her eyes like a candle in wind. The other guests began murmuring, pulling out phones to record what was becoming the scandal of the season, the kind of drama that would dominate social media and gossip columns for weeks. Derek's sister, Valencia, stood up from her seat at the family table, her face a mask of concern that didn't quite reach her eyes, her own wine glass untouched in front of her. "Simone, honey, you're stressed. The pregnancy hormones," Valencia said smoothly, moving toward them with practiced grace. "Let's not let some random girl ruin our celebration. You know how these people are, always trying to get attention, always looking for a handout from folks like us." But Jasmine found her voice again, stronger now, cutting through Valencia's words like a knife through butter. "I'm not lying. I'm not crazy. And I don't want your money. I saw her. I saw the woman in the kitchen, your head chef. I saw her pour something into that specific wine bottle, the one with the gold ribbon, the one that was meant only for Mrs. Wellington." Her finger shot out, pointing directly at the bottle, sitting in an ice bucket beside Simone's plate. The gold ribbon clearly visible, the special vintage Derek had ordered from his private collection, to toast his wife, an unborn child. She was crying while she did it, saying she was sorry, saying she had no choice. And then a man came in, a man in an expensive suit, and he gave her money, a thick envelope of money, and she said it would look like pregnancy complications. No one will suspect. And he said, good, because if you mess this up, your son won't make it to his 10th birthday. The details spilled out of Jasmine's mouth like water from a broken dam, specific and visceral, and impossible to ignore. And suddenly the air in the ballroom felt different, charged with possibility and danger. Derek's face had gone from red to ashen, his eyes darting to the wine bottle, to Simone, to Valencia, whose expression had shifted into something unreadable. Malcolm released Jasmine, his training kicking in, his hand moving to his radio to call for backup, to seal the room, to treat this like the threat it might actually be. And in that moment, as 200 guests held their breath and Simone's hand unconsciously moved to her throat, everyone realized that this lavish celebration had just become a crime scene and nothing would ever be the same. Subscribe and hit that notification bell right now, because what Derek discovers about who wanted his wife and child dead will shatter everything he thought he knew about family, loyalty, and the deadliest betrayals that come from those closest to your heart. The hotel kitchen was chaos, all stainless steel and fluorescent lights, nothing like the elegant ballroom, just 2 floors above where guests still whispered and recorded everything on their phones. Derek had the wine bottle in one hand and his other hand gripped around Chef Patricia's wrist so tight his knuckles had gone white. And the woman was sobbing so hard she could barely stand, her white chef's coat stained with sauce and tears. Malcolm had cleared the kitchen of other staff within 90 seconds, his team forming a perimeter while hotel management scrambled to contain what was quickly becoming their worst nightmare, a potential murder attempt at a billionaire's party that would destroy their 5-star reputation and probably put them out of business. Simone sat on a stool. Someone had brought her, one hand still on her belly, her face drained of color but her eyes sharp and focused, watching everything, while Jasmine stood near the walk-in freezer, flanked by 2 security guards who weren't sure if she was a witness or a suspect or some kind of guardian angel sent to prevent a tragedy. Tell me again. Derek's voice was ice, the kind of cold that preceded violence, and Patricia flinched like he'd struck her. Tell me exactly what happened, who paid you, and why you tried to kill my wife and child, and if you lie to me even once, I will make sure you never see daylight again. His threat wasn't empty. Everyone in that kitchen knew it. Derek Wellington had the money and connections to bury someone so deep they'd be forgotten by history. Patricia's makeup ran down her face in black streams, her hands shaking as she tried to form words through her sobs, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper that somehow carried through the silent kitchen like a confession in church. They have my son, Patricia said, and those 4 words changed everything, transformed her from monster to victim in the space of a heartbeat, though the wine bottle in Derek's hand remained just as deadly regardless of her motivation. They took my baby 3 days ago, my Terence. He's only 9 years old, and they sent me pictures of him tied up and crying, and they said if I didn't do exactly what they told me, they would kill him, they would make him suffer first, and send me pieces of him in the mail. The horror of it spilled out between sobs, and even Derek's iron grip loosened slightly, though his face remained hard as granite. Patricia had been the head chef at the Metropolitan Hotel for 12 years, had cooked for presidents and celebrities and foreign dignitaries, had a spotless record and a reputation for excellence, and now she was confessing to attempted murder while her child's life hung in the balance somewhere in the darkness of the city. A man came to my apartment. He was wearing a mask, expensive clothes. He knew everything about me, where Terence went to school, what time I picked him up, what route I took home, everything. She looked up at Derek with eyes that had seen hell, and her next words came out in a rush. He gave me the poison in a vial, said it was tasteless, said it would cause a miscarriage and organ failure, but look natural, like pregnancy complications, and he gave me $50,000 cash, and said there would be another 50 when it was done, and I'd get Terence back on hard. Malcolm was already on his phone, coordinating with the police, his jaw clenched tight, while Simone had gone even paler, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly, as if she could protect her daughter from the evil that had nearly touched them. Jasmine stepped forward then, her voice stronger than it had been in the ballroom, and everyone turned to look at this thin girl in ragged clothes who had somehow saved the day. "I saw the man," Jasmine said, and hope flickered across Patricia's face like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. "I was in the alley behind the hotel, going through the trash bins, and I saw him through the kitchen window when he came in tonight to check on things, to make sure you were going through." She looked at Patricia with something like Migdakim, the standing that came from knowing what it meant to be desperate and alone. "He came in through the service entrance about 2 hours before the dinner started. He was tall, black, maybe 50 years old, wearing a grey suit that probably cost more than my grandmother's whole house, and he had a ring on his right hand, a big gold ring with a red stone, and a scar above his left eyebrow shaped like a crescent moon." The description was precise, detailed, the kind of observation that came from living on the streets where noticing everything could mean the difference between survival and danger. Derek's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, recognition, denial, and finally a rage so pure it seemed to emanate from him like heat. "That's Raymond," he said, his voice hollow, and Simone gasped, because Raymond was Derek's business partner of 10 years, his right-hand man, the person he trusted with everything from corporate secrets to family matters. Raymond Pierce, he has that exact scar from a car accident when we were in college together, and that ring belonged to his father. The betrayal hit him visibly, his shoulders sagging under the weight of it, and for a moment the billionaire looked lost, like a child trying to understand why someone he loved would hurt him. Valencia had followed them down to the kitchen, and now she stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable, her fingers drumming against her clutch purse in a nervous rhythm that made Jasmine's eyes narrow with suspicion. Malcolm finished his call and stepped forward, his voice professional but urgent. "Zymo is sending detectives and a tactical team to Raymond Pierce's known addresses, his office, everywhere he might be. But Mr. Wellington, if he's willing to poison your wife and unborn child, he's not going to go quietly, and we need to figure out why he'd do this in the first place." The question hung in the air like smoke, because Raymond was already rich, already successful, already had everything a man could want. So what could he possibly gain from killing Simone and the baby? Derek's mind raced through possibilities: business deals gone wrong, corporate rivalries, personal grudges, but nothing made sense. Raymond had been his friend since they were 19 years old, had been best man at his wedding, had held Simone's hand in the hospital when she'd had a scare at 5 months pregnant. The company, Valencia said quietly from the doorway, and everyone turned to her. "Derek, the merger, the Tecton deal, remember, you were going to sign everything over next month, put everything in a trust for the baby, make them the majority shareholder when they turned 21. Her words were careful, measured, but Jasmine could see something flickering behind her eyes, something that made the girl's instincts scream danger. The Tecton merger was worth $40 billion, would make Wellington Industries the largest tech infrastructure company in North America, and whoever controlled the majority shares would have power beyond imagination. If Simone and the baby died, Valencia continued, her voice soft, almost sad, the shares would revert to you. And if something happened to you too, well, your will states everything goes to your closest living relative, which would be me, your sister, and I'm on the board with Raymond. We handle all the voting together. The implications settled over the room like frost, and Simone stood up from her stool so fast, she almost lost her balance. You're saying Raymond wants me and my baby dead for money, for shares in a company? Simone's voice cracked with disbelief and fury, one hand protectively over her belly, the other pointing at Valencia like an accusation. And what are you saying, Valencia, that you're involved too? That you knew about this? The confrontation erupted like a wound bursting open, and Valencia's carefully composed expression finally cracked, revealing something ugly underneath, something that had been festering for years beneath designer clothes and family dinners. I'm saying that maybe some people are tired of watching you play princess. Valencia snapped, her true feelings spilling out like poison from a last boil. You waltz in with your perfect face and your Ivy League degree, and suddenly you're Mrs. Wellington. You're carrying the hair. You're going to be richer than God, while some of us have worked our whole lives in this family business and get treated like employees. The bitterness in her voice was decades old, and Derek stepped back as if she'd slapped him, his sister's face twisted with jealousy and rage he'd never seen before, or maybe had chosen not to see. Patricia was still crying, her son still missing, but even she watched this family drama unfold with wide eyes. While Jasmine backed toward the exit, her survival instincts telling her that rich people's problems had a way of crushing poor people who got caught in the middle. Malcolm's hand moved to his weapon, his eyes scanning the room for threats, and when Valencia's hand dipped into her purse, everything happened at once. "Don't move," Malcolm shouted, his gun drawn, and Valencia froze, but not before pulling out her phone. And the look on her face was pure triumph mixed with desperation, the look of someone who'd already lost, but wanted to burn everything down on the way out. "You want to know where Patricia's son is?" Valencia asked, her voice shaking but defiant. "Raymond has him in a warehouse on the docks, and if I don't call him in the next 5 minutes to confirm the job is done, Terence dies. So maybe everyone should think very carefully about what happens next." The kitchen went silent except for Patricia's anguished sob, and Derek Wellington, billionaire, businessman, soon-to-be father, stood frozen between his wife and his daughters, between the family he was building and the family that wanted to destroy it, and realized that the real poison had been inside his house all along. If you want to see how Derek chooses between saving an innocent child and getting justice for his wife, smash that like button and drop a comment, because Chapter 3 reveals secrets that will make you question who the real villains are and whether redemption is possible when betrayal runs this deep. The warehouse on Pier 47 smelled like rust and salt water and fear, the kind of place where the city's darkness gathered in corners that daylight never reached, where shipping containers stacked like metal coffins and the Hudson River slapped against rotting pilings with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown to disaster. Derek's convoy of 3 black SUVs had made the 20-minute drive from the hotel in 12, running red lights with police escort, Malcolm coordinating with NFIS's hostage rescue team through an earpiece, while Derek sat in the back seat, feeling his world crack apart piece by piece. Patricia was in the second vehicle, sedated but stable, a female officer holding her hand, while they raced toward the place where her son might already be dead, where Raymond Pierce had set up his endgame like a chess master who'd been planning this move for years. Simone had wanted to come, had fought Derek with everything she had, but he put his foot down for maybe the first time in their marriage, told her that their daughter needed her alive, that he couldn't risk both of them, and she'd finally agreed to wait at the hotel under heavy security with strict orders that Valencia not be allowed anywhere near her. Valencia herself was in the third SUV, hands zip-tied, face streaked with tears, oscillating between defiant silence and desperate bargaining, claiming she'd only wanted what was fair, that Raymond had manipulated her, that she never meant for anyone to actually die. Jasmine had insisted on coming too, this thin girl from the streets who'd saved everything, and Derek hadn't had the heart or the time to argue, so now she sat beside him in borrowed clothes from the hotel gift shop, her eyes fixed on the approaching warehouse like she could see through walls to the truth inside. Why did you do? Derek asked her quietly as they pulled up to the perimeter the police had established 3 blocks out. Why risk yourself for people you don't even know? You could have just walked away, could have ignored what you saw, and no one would have blamed you. Jasmine turned to look at him, and in her young eyes was a wisdom born from suffering that made Derek feel small despite his billions. Because my grandmother always said that when you have nothing, the only thing that matters is doing right. Jasmine answered, her voice steady, despite the danger they were driving toward, despite the fact that she was just a homeless teenager who should have been worried where her next meal was coming from, instead of preventing murders in bulk. She used to clean houses for rich families, worked herself to death for people who barely knew her name, and the only thing she ever asked me was to be better than the world expected, to help when I could help, to speak when I saw wrong. She looked out the window at the warehouse looming in the darkness, its broken windows like dead eyes staring back at them. I saw that chef lady crying, saw how scared she was, and I saw that man threatening her, and I knew if I didn't say something, a woman and a baby would die. And I'd have to live with that forever. And I got nothing in this world except my conscience, so I can't afford to lose that too. Her words hit Derek harder than any business loss ever had. This girl who owned nothing teaching him about wealth he'd never understood, about the currency of character that his money couldn't buy. Malcolm turned from the front seat, his expression grim, tactical vest already on, weapon checked and ready. Raymond's inside, confirmed by thermal imaging, 2nd floor northwest corner, and we've got a heat signature that matches a small child, bound, in the room with him, plus at least 2 other men, probably hired muscle. He pulled up images on a tablet showing the warehouse layout, entry points, sight lines, all the technical details of a rescue operation that could go wrong in 1,000 ways. Hostage rescue is ready to breach in 5 minutes, but Raymond knows we're here. He's got cameras on the perimeter, and he's already called twice demanding to speak to Valencia, saying if she doesn't confirm the job is done, he kills the boy. The stakes couldn't be clearer, and Derek felt the weight of every decision he'd ever made pressing down on him, like gravity had suddenly doubled. They brought Valencia out of the 3rd SUV, her Louboutin heels clicking on the broken asphalt, her evening gown absurd in this setting of urban decay and criminal desperation, but her face had shifted into something calculated, something that made Derek realize his sister was still playing angles, even now. "Let me talk to him," Valencia said, her voice too calm, too controlled. "Raymond trusts me. We've been planning this for 8 months, since you first announced Simone's pregnancy and started talking about the trust fund. and the stock transfers. The confession came out like she was discussing quarterly earnings. No remorse, just strategy. And Derek had to physically restrain himself from striking her, this woman who'd shared his childhood, who'd been his partner in building their father's small construction business into an empire, who he trusted with everything, and who'd been plotting his family's destruction for the better part of a year. Planning what exactly? Derek's voice was dangerously quiet, the calm before violence, and Malcolm put a hand on his shoulder in warning. Tell me everything right now, Valencia, because the police are going in one way or another, and your corporation is the only thing standing between you and spending the rest of your life in prison. Valencia laughed, a bitter sound that carried no humor, only the acid of years of perceived slights and imagined injustices festering into something toxic. Planning to take back what should have been mine, she spat, her composure finally cracking completely. Dad left you controlling interest because you were the son, the golden boy. Never mind that I worked twice as hard, knew the business twice as well, sacrificed everything, including my own family, to build Wellington Industries, while you played corporate rider and married your trophy wife. The venom in her voice when she said Simone's name made Derek's blood boil, but he forced himself to stay calm, to get the information they needed. Raymond felt the same way, passed over for CEO when you brought in outside management, his ideas ignored, his contributions minimized. So we made a plan. If Simone and the baby died, you'd be devastated, probably step back from the company, and would be there to catch you, to take control of everything you'd built on our backs. The confession hung in the humid night air like smoke from a fire that had been burning underground for years, and Derek felt something inside him break. Not the loud shattering of a glass, but the quiet crumbling of a foundation he thought was solid. The realization that the people he'd loved most had hated him enough to kill for it. Patricia had been just a tool, her son just leverage, Simone and his daughter just obstacles to be removed. And he'd been so focused on building his empire that he'd never noticed the rot at its core, never saw how his own success had bred resentment in those closest to him. You're insane, he whispered, but Valencia shook her head, almost pitying. I'm practical, she corrected. You live in a fantasy world where everyone loves you because you're successful, where your money makes you untouchable. But Raymond and I, we live in reality where loyalty is bought and sold, where family means nothing compared to power, and where people like that poor girl there, she nodded toward Jasmine, are invisible until they are inconvenient. The disdain in her voice when she mentioned Jasmine made the teenager step forward. Her hands balled into fists, and when she spoke, her voice carried more authority than Valencia's designer clothes and family name ever could. At least I know what I am, Jasmine said quietly, fiercely. I'm poor, I'm homeless, I got nothing, but I'm not a murderer. I'm not someone who'd kill a baby for money. And when I lay down at night on a subway bench, I can sleep because my hands are clean, which is more than you'll ever be able to say. The word landed like punches, and even the hardened NLP officers watching the exchange looked at Valencia with disgust. This woman who had everything and wanted more badly enough to destroy innocence in the process. Malcolm's earpiece crackled, and his expression darkened further. Raymond's getting impatient, says he wants Valencia on the phone in 60 seconds, or the boy dies, and our thermal shows him holding what looks like a weapon near the child's head. Derek made his decision in the space of a heartbeat, the kind of instant calculation that had made him billions in business, but this time with stakes that actually mattered. with lives in the balance, instead of stock prices and market shares. Give her the phone, he told Malcolm. And when the security chief hesitated, Derek's eyes were hard as diamonds. Give her the phone and put it on speaker, but Valencia, you listen to me very carefully. You're going to tell Raymond that the job is done, that Simone drank the wine, that everything went according to plan, and you're going to convince him to let that child go. He stepped close to his sister, close enough that she could see the promise of retribution in his eyes, the oath of consequences that would follow her for whatever life she had. And if you deviate from that script by even one word, if you try to warn him or signal him in any way, I will personally make sure that you spend the rest of your natural life in a hole so deep that sunlight becomes a memory. And I will use every dollar I have, every connection, every ounce of power to make your existence a living hell. Do you understand me? The threat was delivered in a whisper, but carried the weight of absolute certainty. And Valencia nodded, tears streaming down her face, whether from fear or regret, or just the realization that she lost everything gambling on hatred and greed. Malcolm handed her the phone, the line already connected, and Raymond's voice came through the speaker, tense and demanding. Valencia, tell me this done. Tell me the wife and the brat are handled. Everyone in the perimeter held their breath. Police snipers adjusting their positions on rooftops. Hostage rescue team poised at entry points, and Valencia looked at Derek one last time. Something passing between them that might have been an apology or might have been farewell, before she spoke into the phone with a steadiness that surprised everyone. Don, Raymond, Simone drank the wine right in front of everyone. She collapsed. They rushed her to the hospital. And Derek is there now, completely destroyed. Everything went perfectly. Her lie was smooth, practiced, convincing enough that Raymond's exhale of relief was audible through the speaker. Good, that's good, okay? I'm going to release the kid, then. Going to leave him in the warehouse and disappear. We stick to the plan. Lay low for 6 months. Let Derek spiral. And then we make our move on the board. You could hear the smile in his voice, the satisfaction of a plan executed, and Derek's hands clenched so tight his nails drew blood from his palms. Raymond, Valencia said carefully, let the boy go now. Let him walk out the front door. Prove to me you're keeping your word, that we're partners in this, that you're not going to double-cross me once you have everything. The manipulation was subtle but effective, playing on Raymond's ego and paranoia, and after a pause that felt like hours, he agreed, said he'd untie the kid and send him out, give Valencia proof of his good faith. Malcolm was already signaling the tactical team, getting ready to breach the moment the child was clear, and Jasmine grabbed Derek's arm, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so thin. That lady is evil, your sister, but she's also smart, and smart people don't go down without trying to take everyone with them. So watch her. The warning came just as Patricensis Terence stumbled out the warehouse's main door, hands still bound, face streaked, with tears but alive, and in that moment of distraction, Valencia's hand moved to her other pocket, pulling out a second phone, her emergency phone, and Derek saw it happening like slow motion, saw her thumb moving toward the screen to send a message that would warn Raymond, that would blow the whole operation and probably get people killed. Malcolm saw it too, moved to stop her, but Jasmine was faster. This street kid who'd survived by being quick and aware, and she kicked Valencia's legs out from under her so hard the woman went down face, first on the asphalt, the phone skittering away into darkness, and when Valencia looked up, blood streaming from her nose, Her eyes met Derek's, and in them was nothing but hate, pure and simple, the kind that would burn forever given the chance. Breach! 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 Malcolm shouted into his radio, and the night exploded with movement and sound, flashbangs and shouted commands, and Derek Wellington stood in the shadows, watching his world transform, watching his past burn away, and wondering if there was any future left worth building. Hit that subscribe button and buckle up, because Chapter 4 exposes the final twist in Raymond's plan and forces Derek to make a choice between revenge and redemption that will determine not just his fate, but the fate of everyone this betrayal has touched. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse like thunder in a canyon, and for 3 eternal seconds, nobody breathed, nobody moved, everyone frozen in that horrible space between hearing violence and knowing its consequences. Derek's heart stopped, his mind immediately going to the worst possibilities. Officer down, hostage dead, operation failed. But then Malcolm's voice crackled through the radio with an update that changed everything. Suspect down, I repeat. Suspect down. Raymond Pierce fired on entry team and was neutralized by return fire. No officers injured. Scene is secure. The words should have brought relief, should have meant victory, but all Derek felt was emptiness, this hollow sensation spreading through his chest like he'd been the one. Raymond was dead, his best friend of 25 years. The man who'd been his roommate in college, who'd celebrated every business victory and consoled every loss, who'd stood beside him when his father died and promised to always have his back. That man had just been killed trying to murder a child and frame Derek's wife for a crime she didn't commit. The betrayal wasn't just professional or financial. It was personal in a way that made Derek question every memory, every moment of friendship, wondering if any of it had been real or if Raymond had been playing a long game since the beginning, waiting for the right moment to strike. Patricia had collapsed when Terence stumbled out of the warehouse, mother and son reuniting. In a tangle of tears and desperate hugs, the boy traumatized but physically unharmed, and paramedics were checking him over while police documented everything for the inevitable investigation. Valencia was in handcuffs now, being loaded into a police van, her expensive dress torn and dirty, her face a mask of defeat and lingering hatred, and she'd stopped talking entirely, lawyer already called, walls going up between her and consequences that would follow her for decades. Jasmine stood near Derek, this unexpected guardian angel who'd saved everything, and when the billionaire looked at her, really looked at her for the first time without the filter of wealth and status, he saw something that shamed him, pure goodness in a world that had given her every reason to be bitter, courage in someone who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, an immoral clarity that his billions had never bought him. I need to check on something, Malcolm said, his weapon still drawn, his eyes scanning the warehouse like he expected more threats to materialize from the shadows. And he disappeared inside with 2 other officers, leaving Derek in the aftermath of violence that solved nothing and answered no questions. Why had Raymond done this? They'd built Wellington Industries together, had been equal partners in everything, until Derek's calculated risks started paying off bigger than Raymond's conservative strategies, until the gap between them widened from colleagues to employer and employee, from equals to subordinate. Had that been enough? Was ego and envy sufficient motivation to plot the murder of an innocent woman and an unborn child? Or was there something else, something deeper, that Derek had missed in his single-minded focus on building empire and legacy? The questions spiraled through his mind like vultures circling carrion, and he pulled out his phone to call Simone, needing to hear her voice, needing confirmation that she was safe and their daughter was safe and something in his life was still solid. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with anxiety. Derek, is it over? Is the boy safe? Her first thoughts were for Terence, for Patricia, for strangers caught in the crossfire of wealthy people's wars. And Derek felt his throat tighten with emotion usually kept buried under layers of business and control. He's safe, baby. He's with his mother, and Raymond is dead, and Valencia is arrested, and it's over. It's all over. But even as he said the words, he knew they were a lie, because this kind of betrayal didn't end with arrests and death. It metastasized into something that would poison every relationship, every trust, every assumption about the people in his life. I'm coming back to you, he told Simone, his voice breaking slightly. I'm coming back, and we're going to figure this out together. We're going to protect our family, and we're going to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Simone was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a strength that reminded Derek why he'd fallen in love with her in the first place. We also need to help that girl, Jasmine. We owe her everything. Derek, our lives, our daughter's life, and I won't have her going back to the streets after what she did for us. Malcolm emerged from the warehouse carrying a laptop, his expression grim, and Derek knew immediately that whatever was on that computer would make things worse, would add layers to a nightmare that already felt bottomless. You need to see this, Malcolm said, opening the laptop to review email chains, financial documents, a digital paper trail of conspiracy that stretched back not 8 months like Valencia claimed, but 5 years. Back to when Derek first started talking about marriage, about settling down, about building something beyond business. Raymond hadn't just wanted the company. He'd wanted to destroy Derek personally, to take everything that made him happy and grind it into dust. And the emails showed a progression from professional jealousy to personal hatred, from resentment to obsession. There were messages to Valencia about how Derek didn't deserve his success, how he'd gotten lucky while more deserving people struggled, how his relationship with Simone was just another example of things falling into his lap that he hadn't earned. There were plans for other attempts if the poison failed. Car accidents, home invasions, even kidnapping scenarios, all meticulously detailed with contingencies and backup strategies like Raymond was planning a military campaign instead of multiple murders. But the worst part, the part that made Derek physically ill, was the folder labeled justification filled with a manifesto Raymond had been writing, pages and pages explaining why Derek had to be brought low, why his happiness was an affront to natural order, why someone who had everything didn't deserve anything. He was insane, Derek whispered, scrolling through the madness, the twisted logic of a man who'd convinced himself that friendship was weakness and that destroying someone was the same as surpassing them. No, Jasmine said quietly, and everyone turned to look at her, this teenager in borrowed clothes, who'd been silent during the revelation. He wasn't crazy, he was hurt, and he let that hurt turn into something evil. Let it grow until it was bigger than everything else. And that's not insane. That's just human. Just what happens when people hold on to pain instead of letting it go. Her wisdom was uncomfortable, asking them to see Raymond as something other than a monster, as a person who'd made choices that led him down a path to darkness. And Derek didn't want to hear it, wanted to keep Raymond in the box labeled Emily, where he was safe to hate without complexity or nuance. But the truth was never that simple. And as the police processed the scene and paramedics cleared Terence for transport to the hospital, and Valencia's lawyer showed up with paperwork and threats, Derek found himself sitting on the hood of one of the SUVs, head in his hands, trying to process the implosion of everything he thought he knew about loyalty and family. Jasmine sat beside him, not touching, not speaking, just present in a way that was somehow comforting. Her existence proof that goodness still existed in a world that felt suddenly very dark. What do I do now? Derek asked, not really expecting an answer, more just voicing the question that consumed him. How do I go forward, knowing that the people I loved most were willing to kill for money and power? How do I trust anyone ever again? Jasmine was quiet for a long moment, her eyes on the warehouse where Raymond had died, where a child had been held hostage, where the physical evidence of betrayal was being catalogued and photographed for trial. You start by being grateful for what you got, she said finally, her voice soft but firm. You got a wife who loves you, a baby girl coming who's going to need you, and you got a chance to learn who people really are before it was too late. That's more than a lot of folks get. She turned to look at him, and in the dim light from the police floods, her face looked older than her years, marked by wisdom that came from surviving things that would have broken others. My grandmother used to say that betrayal is just truth coming late to the party, that people show you who they are eventually, and you can either be mad about it or be grateful you finally know, but you can't be both. Her philosophy was simple, maybe too simple, for the complexity of corporate conspiracy and attempted murder. But there was something in it that resonated, something that gave Derek a handhold in the chaos. You saved my family, he said, looking at Jasmine with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. A girl I'd never met, who had no reason to care about my problems, who could have walked away and no one would have blamed you. You risked yourself to warn us, and I need to know why. I need to understand what makes someone do that. Jasmine smiled, a sad expression that carried the weight of loss and hope in equal measure. Because when my grandmother was dying, she told me that the world was going to try to make me hard, try to make me selfish, try to convince me that people like you didn't care about people like me. And maybe she was right about some of that. But she also said that the only way to fight that hardness was to stay soft, to keep caring even when it hurt, to help even when it cost me something. Because the moment I stopped doing that, the moment I let the world make me cold, I'd lose the only thing I had left of her, which was her example of how to be human. Tears streaked down her face, mixing with the dirt and grime of living rough, and Derek felt his own eyes burning. This billionaire who prided himself on control and composure breaking down in front of a homeless teenager who taught him more about wealth in one night than decades of success ever had. I'm going to help you, he said, the words coming out like a vow, like a promise to something larger than business deals or quarterly earnings. I'm going to make sure you never sleep on the streets again, that you have everything you need, education, housing, whatever it takes, and I'm going to set up a foundation in your grandmother's name to help other people like you, people the world overlooks. Because you're right, I've been so focused on building my empire that I forgot to see the people building it around me. Forgot that money is just paper if it doesn't serve something bigger than itself. Jasmine shook her head, not dismissing the offer, but tempering it with reality. I don't need charity, Mr. Wellington. What I need is opportunity, a chance to prove I'm more than where I come from, more than the circumstances that put me on the street. And if you really want to help, you'll give me that chance instead of just writing a check to make yourself feel better about being rich. The challenge in her words was clear, and Derek nodded, recognizing that true help meant respecting dignity, meant seeing potential instead of just need. Malcolm called out that he needed to head back, that Simone was getting anxious, that the police had everything they needed for now, and Derek stood, his body aching like it aged years in the span of hours, but his mind somehow clearer than it had been in a long time. The SUVs pulled away from the warehouse, leaving behind crime scene tape and the ghost of a friendship that had curdled into something deadly. And Derek looked out the window at the city passing by. All those lights representing lives and stories and struggles he'd never bothered to consider. And he wondered if tragedy was the only teacher powerful enough to crack open a heart that success had calcified. Make sure you subscribe because Chapter 5 brings this journey home with revelations about second chances, the true meaning of wealth, and how one billionaire's tears water the seeds of change that will transform everything he thought he knew about power, purpose, and the girl from the streets who saved his soul along with his family. 6 months later, Derek stood in the nursery of his penthouse apartment, holding his daughter Kennedy against his chest, her tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb with a grip that belied her 3-week-old existence, and he felt tears streaming down his face for what must have been the 100th time since that night at the warehouse. Simone had delivered their baby girl perfectly healthy, every test showing no traces of the poison that had almost stolen her life before it began. And the doctors said it was a miracle that Jasmine had intervened when she did, that 15 more seconds and Simone would have swallowed enough of the tainted wine to cause irreversible damage. Kennedy had her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and when she looked up at Derek with that unfocused newborn gaze, he saw everything he'd almost lost, everything he'd taken for granted while chasing success that suddenly seemed meaningless compared to this small life depending on him. The nursery was painted soft yellow, filled with expensive furniture and designer toys, all the trappings of wealth that Derek had once thought mattered. But now he understood that the real treasure was measured in breath and heartbeats and the weight of his daughter sleeping trustingly in his arms. "She's beautiful," Jasmine said from the doorway, and Derek turned to see the teenager who'd saved everything, though she looked different now. Her hair freshly cut and styled, wearing clothes that actually fit, her face filled out from regular meals and the kind of stability that came from having a safe place to sleep. Derek had kept his promise, not with charity, but with opportunity, enrolling Jasmine in a private school where her sharp mind could flourish, setting her up in his small apartment and offering her a part-time job at Wellington Industries in their community outreach division, a position she'd attacked with the same fierce determination that had driven her to crash a billionaire's party to save a stranger. "She's perfect," Derek agreed, his voice thick with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "And she's alive because of you, because you had the courage to speak up when you saw something wrong, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to live up to the example you set that night." The trial had been a media sensation, Valencia Wellington and the conspiracy to murder her brother's wife and unborn child, every detail picked apart by news outlets and social media. The kind of scandal that destroyed reputations and ended careers. Valencia had pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and kidnapping, taking a deal that gave her 25 years with possibility of parole in 15. And the last time Derek had seen her was in the courtroom when the judge read the sentence, and she looked at him with eyes that held no apology, no remorse, only the bitter resentment of someone who felt wronged by the universe itself. He tried to understand, had spent hours with therapists and counselors trying to comprehend how sibling rivalry could metastasize into murderous intent. But in the end, he'd had to accept that some people's pain made them cruel instead of compassionate, that Valencia had chosen hatred over healing, and would live with those consequences. Patricia had been granted full immunity in exchange for her testimony. Her son Terence in therapy, but recovering, and Derek had quietly paid off her mortgage and set up a trust fund for the boy's education, not as payment, but as acknowledgements that she'd been a victim to, a mother forced into an impossible choice between her child and her conscience. The Wellington Industries Board had been completely restructured. Outside directors brought in to prevent the kind of insider conspiracy that had nearly destroyed everything. And Derek had stepped back from day-to-day operations to focus on what he called legacy building, which really meant figuring out how to use his wealth for something more meaningful than accumulation. Simone had been his anchor through all of it, her strength and grace under pressure, revealing depths he'd never fully appreciated, and their marriage had emerged from the crucible of betrayal stronger than before, built on the kind of honest communication that crisis demands and comfort often neglects. South School, full. Derek asked Jasmine, carefully laying Kennedy in her crib, the baby's face peaceful in sleep, and he gestured for Jasmine to follow him to the living room, where Simone sat working on her laptop, managing the foundation they'd established together. "School's hard but good," Jasmine answered, settling into one of the leather chairs that probably cost more than everything she'd owned in her previous life, though she no longer seemed intimidated by wealth, treating it as a tool rather than a definition of worth. "My English teacher wants me to write about that night, about what happened at the hotel. But I don't know how to put it into words that don't sound either like I'm bragging or I'm making it bigger than it was." She looked between Derek and Simone, these two people who'd become something like family to her over the past months, though everyone was careful not to push too hard, to let the relationship develop naturally without the weight of obligation or debt. "You tell the truth," Simone said, looking up from her laptop with a smile that held warmth and understanding. "You tell how you felt scared but did it anyway. How you saw someone in danger and couldn't walk away even though it would have been easier and safer, and you let people draw their own conclusions about what that means." Simone had changed too. Her priorities shifted by nearly dying. Her pregnancy transformed from a status symbol into a sacred trust, and she'd thrown herself into the foundation work with passion that surprised even herself. The Justice and Grace Foundation, named after the two qualities Jasmine had embodied that night, focused on helping homeless youth get access to education, housing, and mental health services, already serving over 500 young people in New York alone, with plans to expand nationally. Patricia worked for the foundation now too, running their culinary training program, teaching cooking skills to young people aging out of foster care, turning her own trauma into purpose that helped others avoid similar exploitation. "I still have nightmares," Jasmine admitted quietly, her hands twisting in her lap. "I dream that I'm too late, that Mrs. Wellington drinks the wine and dies, that the baby dies, and I wake up panicking until I remember that it turned out okay, that everyone lived except the bad guys." Her honesty was refreshing in a world where everyone tried to project strength and certainty, and Derek moved to sit beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "You know what I dream about?" Derek asked, his voice soft but carrying the weight of confession. "I dream about all the times before that night when I walked past people like you, people struggling and hurting, and I didn't see them, didn't care enough to notice their humanity, was so wrapped up in my own importance that I treated other people like background characters in my story instead of the heroes of their own." He looked at Jasmine with eyes that held both gratitude and shame. "You taught me that wealth isn't what you have, it's what you do with what you have, and that the richest person in any room is the one with the most courage and compassion, not the biggest bank account. The foundation had become his obsession in the best way possible. The same drive that had built a business empire now channeled toward actually changing lives, and he discovered that helping people was more satisfying than any corporate victory. That watching a homeless teenager graduate high school or a struggling family move into stable housing gave him joy that mergers and acquisitions never had. Simon joined them, sitting on Derek's other side, and the three of them made an unlikely family portrait. The billionaire couple and the street kid who'd saved them, bound together by trauma and gratitude and a shared commitment to making something good come from something terrible. The Lanciers wrote me a letter, Derek said, pulling an envelope from his pocket, the prison return address visible in the corner. Her lawyer sent it last week, and I haven't been able to decide whether to read it or burn it. He turned the envelope over in his hands, feeling the weight of his sister's words through paper and ink. Part of me wants to understand why she hated me enough to do what she did, wants to find some explanation that makes sense, but another part of me knows that nothing she says will change what happened, won't bring back the trust or the relationship we had before I knew what she was capable of. Jasmine reached out and gently took the envelope from his hands, looking at it like it was a live snake that might strike at any moment. My grandmother used to say that forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about you, about not carrying around poison in your heart that only hurts you while they go on living their life, Jasmine said, handing the envelope back to Derek. But she also said that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, doesn't mean trusting again, doesn't mean letting someone hurt you twice just because you were related or because they apologized. She met Derek's eyes with a directness that still sometimes surprised him. This teenager who'd lived more life in her 16 years than many people experienced in 6 decades. Read the letter if you think it will help you heal. Burn it if you think it will hurt you more. But don't read it because you owe her anything, because you don't. She gave up the right to your emotional energy when she tried to kill your family. The wisdom in her words settled over the room like benediction, and Derek nodded slowly, tucking the envelope away unread, at least for now, maybe forever. Kennedy's cry came from the nursery, that urgent newborn sound that demanded immediate response, and Simone stood to get her, but Jasmine was faster, asking if she could do it, and Simone smiled her permission. They watched through the doorway as Jasmine carefully picked up the baby, cradling Kennedy with the kind of gentle confidence that came from helping raise cousins and younger siblings before homelessness had isolated her. And when she started humming a soft lullaby, Derek felt his throat tighten with emotion again. "We're going to be okay," Simone said, taking Derek's hand, her fingers interlacing with his in a gesture that had become their anchor through crisis and recovery. "We're going to raise our daughter to understand that privilege comes with responsibility, that wealth is a tool for helping others, not a measure of worth, and that the most important thing in life is how you treat people, especially people who can't do anything for you in return." Derek pulled his wife close, kissing her forehead, breathing in the scent of her perfume mixed with baby powder and the coffee she'd been drinking while working. "I love you," he said, simple words that carried the weight of everything they'd survived, everything they'd learned, everything they'd become. "I love you for being strong enough to listen to a scared girl when everyone else wanted her thrown out. for being brave enough to question what was happening instead of just trusting that everything was fine, and for reminding me every day that the best things in life are the people we love and the good we do, not the money we make or the power we hold. The moment stretched between them, sacred and ordinary, the kind of intimacy that crisis had taught them to cherish. And when Jasmine returned with Kennedy, now peaceful and drowsy, they made room for her on the couch. This unlikely family brought together by poison and prevention, by betrayal and bravery, by the truth that sometimes the people who save us are the ones we'd never expect, the ones the world has taught us to overlook. 3 months later, Derek stood at a podium in front of 500 people, businessmen and politicians, and community leaders, announcing the expansion of the Justice and Grace Foundation to 10 major cities. A $50 million initial investment that would help thousands of young people like Jasmine find their way from streets to stability. Beside him on stage sat Jasmine herself, no longer the scared teenager in ragged clothes, but a poised young woman who'd just been named the foundation's youth ambassador, who would travel and speak and tell her story to inspire others to see the invisible, to help the hurting, to remember that every person matters regardless of their circumstances. When it was her turn to speak, Jasmine approached the microphone with only slight nervousness, her voice growing stronger with each word. 6 months ago, I was homeless, hungry, and invisible, she began, her eyes scanning the crowd. I was the kind of person most of you would step over on the sidewalk, would avoid eye contact, would dismiss as someone else's problem. And I don't blame you for that, because that's what society teaches us, to separate ourselves into categories of deserving and undeserving, worthy and worthless. The audience shifted uncomfortably, confrontable, truth they usually avoided, but Jasmine pressed on. But then I saw something wrong, saw someone in danger, and I had a choice. I could do what was safe and walk away, or I could do what was right and speak up, even though I knew people like me aren't supposed to tell people like Mr. and Mrs. Wellington what to do. She looked at Derek and Simone sitting in the front row, Simone holding Kennedy, who was dressed in a tiny outfit that probably cost more than Jasmine's entire wardrobe used to be worth. They listened when they didn't have to. They believed me when they had every reason not to. And they taught me that maybe the categories we create aren't real. Maybe we're all just people trying to survive, and some of us need help, and some of us can give help. And the only thing that matters is whether we choose to see each other's humanity. The applause started slowly but built to a standing ovation, and Derek found himself crying again. These tears, different from the ones he'd shed in the warehouse or the hospital or the courtroom, tears of hope instead of grief, of possibility instead of... When the event ended and the crowds dispersed and they were finally alone in the car heading home, Kennedy asleep in her car seat and Jasmine texting friends about her speech, Derek looked out at the city lights and thought about how close he'd come to losing everything that mattered while protecting everything that didn't. "Thank you," he said quietly to Jasmine, and she looked up from her phone with a quizzical expression. "I've thanked you before, I know, but I need you to understand that you didn't just save my wife and daughter that night. You saved me from becoming the kind of person who has everything and appreciates nothing, who builds empires on the backs of people he never sees, who measures success in dollars instead of lives changed." Jasmine smiled, that wise expression that made her seem much older than her years. "You saved yourself, Mr. Wellington. I just gave you the chance to choose who you wanted to be. And you chose right. And that's all any of us can do. Just keep choosing right, even when it's hard, even when it costs us something, even when the world tells us that kindness is weakness and compassion is foolish. The car pulled up to the building, and they rode the elevator in comfortable silence. This family forged in fire and fear, and the kind of grace that transforms tragedy into purpose. That night, after Kennedy was asleep and Simone had gone to bed, and Jasmine was in the guest room that had slowly become her permanent space, Derek sat alone in his study and finally opened Valencia's letter, the envelope he'd been carrying for months. Her handwriting was familiar, the same neat script she'd used to sign birthday cards and business memos. But the words themselves were a journey through justified bitterness, selective memory, and grudging acknowledgement that maybe, possibly, she'd been wrong. She didn't apologize. Not really. Just explained her reasoning in a way that made sense to her, if to no one else. And Derek read it once, twice, then carefully placed it in a drawer where he could find it if he ever needed to remember why forgiveness was important. But trust had to be. He would visit Valencia eventually, would try to rebuild some kind of relationship, because she was still his sister, still family despite everything. But it would be on his terms, with boundaries and honesty and the understanding that some betrayals leave scars that never fully heal. But tonight, he just wanted to be grateful for what he had, for the wife sleeping peacefully down the hall, for the daughter breathing softly in her crib, for the young woman who'd become like a daughter to him, for the foundation changing lives, for the second chance he'd been given to get his priorities right. He walked to Kennedy's room, stood over her crib, watching her sleep, and whispered a promise to do better, to be better, to raise her in a world where wealth meant responsibility and privilege meant service, and the measure of a person was how they treated those who could do nothing for them. Thank you, he whispered into the darkness, to Jasmine, to fate, to whatever force had put a homeless girl in the right place at the right time to save everything. Thank you for teaching me that the smallest voice sometimes carries the biggest truth, and that the richest man isn't the one with the most money, but the one who knows what truly matters. And in that moment, with tears streaming down his face, Derek Wellington finally understood what wealth really meant. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment about a time when someone unexpected changed your life. Because we all have those moments, those people who show up when we need them most and remind us what it means to be human. And sharing those stories keeps the light alive in a world that sometimes feels very dark. So thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And remember that you never know when you might be someone else's Jasmine, someone else's unexpected hero. So stay kind, stay brave, and keep choosing to see the humanity in everyone you meet.